Like, because once you start using the word Godwinks, people really kind of get it pretty quickly. It doesn't take much time.
As a matter of fact, we hear it all the time, John. People will say, wow, I finally have a word to call this. I knew it was more than coincidence,
Yeah.
and I knew God was in this, but sometimes they'd say God incidences or God moments, but they love the word God wink because that wink is just that acknowledgement, like when you're at the big table with all these people you loved and you're a little kid and you see grandma or grandpa look across the table and just give you a little wink. You knew it meant, I'm thinking about you, kid. I love you. And that's what a God wink is. Out of 8 billion people on the planet, it's a person to person call just for you, with God saying, I love you that much. I'm going to enter in this time in your life and show myself to you. And that's why we have to acknowledge him when we get God winks.
So now, please welcome the official, non-official, non-sponsor of the Savannah Bananas, but a big fan. Please welcome John Fletcher.
Thank you, my friend Jesse Cole, owner of the Savannah Bananas, and welcome to this Friday's edition of 15 on Fridays with Fletch. I'm a huge fan of today's guests because I've read their books, watched their movies, and I read their devotionals. We're talking about the folks who created Godwinks books and Godwinks Christmas movies that were #1 on Hallmark every Christmas season. SQuire Rushnell was a successful TV executive who led Good Morning America to first place for the first time and shared 75 Emmy Awards as the father of Schoolhouse Rock on ABC. He also became a legend in children's TV programming. And his wife, Louise DuArt, is one of the most recognized comedic impressionists and worked with TV legends Carol Burnett, Tim Conway, Harvey Korman, and more. So SQuire and Louise have produced a dozen books and 5 movies, with the 4 on Hallmark reaching the #1 faith movie at Christmas for several years. They've created When God Winks at You, which helps us recognize God's hand in our lives is not just luck or coincidence. So please welcome SQuire Rushnell and Louise DuArt on 15 on Fridays with Fletch. How are y'all doing today?
We're doing
Hey,
great, John.
great, John. Good to see you. And I love you in that Godwinks hat.
Oh,
What can I
yeah.
say? Well, it does help show, cover the wall. So if people don't know it this way, they go, hey, maybe he's got a full head of hair. Well, tell us, how did y'all first recognize and define a Godwink?
Well, a Godwink is something that came about through a Godwink. I was at a time in my life where I was really fascinated with history, and I was reading American heroes' stories, and I read that Adams and Jefferson both died on the same day. And it wasn't just any day, but it was the 4th of July. And then I thought, this is amazing. But it wasn't just any 4th of July. It was the exact 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So it was really 200 years ago, last Saturday, July 4th, that these 2 men had died. And I thought, this is amazing. This has got to be more than coincidence. And so it took me about 10 years after that to start writing a book about what I thought was coincidence. But along the way, we kept meeting people who said, what do you call a coincidence that isn't a coincidence? Well, then we started thinking, well, what do you call a coincidence that isn't a coincidence? And we talked to everybody who was standing still. We prayed about it. And one day that little word Godwink just came into mind, just floated into mind. And it was before the first book was published, which ended up being called When God Winks. But what we did is we did a search of all the coincidence names, put in the word Godwink in the manuscript, and it fit. And more important than that, it fit into the language when people started using it.
Well, and
So that was the beginning of the word.
I've had people ask me how to give an example, and I said, imagine that you're running late to a meeting and you're all frustrated and you're going, I'm going to miss this person I was supposed to meet, and I'm running 10 minutes late. and you rush up and you get on the elevator, and at that last second, the person that comes on the elevator with you was that person that you were supposed to meet. And now you've got quality time for probably 20 or 30 seconds on the elevator with him or her.
Uh-huh.
And that's an example of a God wink. And we always tend to think of those as moments of luck or coincidence. And it's so much bigger and more beautiful than that.
Well, it sure is.
You know, we often say that we're on this grand GPS, God's positioning system. And, you know, the wonderful scripture that says, in all your ways, acknowledge me, and I will direct your steps, your paths. So when we acknowledge God, he goes to work and he starts lining things up, divinely aligning things up to meet the right people at the right place at the right time. We have so many stories about that. That's how we met over, it was 50 years ago, I guess, right?
Well, we were divinely aligned together. And just in the same way that you were divinely aligned with that gentleman together, and when the paths of divine alignment cross, there's always a God wink there.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the God wink principles. And there's another God wink principle about coincidence. You know, I never bothered to look up the word coincidence in the beginning. Well, why would you look up a word that you know what it means?
Mm-hmm.
But it took about 5 years. And one day I was just prompted to do that. And I found out that coincidence in the dictionary means two remarkable events that converge without apparent cause. And I thought, well, that's not what a God wink is.
Mm-hmm.
A God wink are two remarkable events that converge with a cause, and that cause is divine. It's God. And so as a result of that, we started putting together principles that we had discovered along the way. And a coincidence, and God winks and coincidence are not the same. One is of divine origin and the other is without.
Mm-hmm.
So we realized we were filling a vacancy in the language and we never even realized it.
How difficult was it at first to distinguish a God wink from luck or coincidence when you were explaining it to people?
Well, it wasn't difficult at all. Because once you start using the word coincidence, or rather God winks, people really kind of get it pretty quickly. It doesn't take much time.
As a matter of fact, we hear it all the time, John. People will say, wow, I finally have a word to call this. I knew it was more than coincidence.
Yeah.
And I knew God was in this, but you know, sometimes they'd say God incidences or God moments, but they love the word God wink because that wink is just that acknowledgement. Like when you're at the big table with all these people you loved and you're a little kid and you see grandma or grandpa look across the table and just give you a little wink. You knew it meant, I'm thinking about you, kid. I love you. And that's what a God wink is. Out of 8 billion people on the planet, it's a person-to-person call just for you, with God saying, I love you that much. I'm going to enter in this time in your life and show myself to you. And that's why we have to acknowledge him when we get God winks. We say to people, you know, when this happens to you, don't just let it go. First off, you should write it down, because when people start writing down their God winks, because they'll often say to us, well, how do I get God winks? Well, if you pray, you get more God winks. You ask God to show himself to you, but then start writing them down, because after 2 or 3 weeks, you'll look back and you'll say, wow, there is a pattern. There are God winks all around me every single day.
Yeah. So in that entered another principle. When I pray, I'm talking to God. When he talks to me, it's a God wink.
I love that. Once you understood what a God wink was, did memories of moments like these just suddenly start rushing into your brain?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
totally.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, since when we were kids, we remembered things. We said, oh my goodness, you know, I often say you live your life forward, but you really understand it backwards when you look back. And so often, even as a little kid, even how I met Carol Burnett and Tim Conway and Harvey Korman. I mean, I was a little kid that watched the Carol Burnett show, and it was my favorite show in the whole world. And my mother, who was very Italian Catholic, would take me to the Catholic church, and she'd say to me in her thick Boston accent, "Here, Louise, here's a quarter. Light a candle for the souls in purgatory." So I think as a little kid, I had one candle, one quarter, and I would light the candle, and I would always feel so terrible because I didn't pray for the souls in purgatory. I would just say, "Please God, I just want to meet Carol Burnett. Please God, I just want to meet Carol Burnett." And years later, through amazing divine alignments of Godwink after Godwink, Carol Burnett saw me on a TV show I was doing because I ended up going to California, wanted to be just like Carol Burnett. And I was doing a variety show, and they all knew, the writers knew how much I loved Carol. So they wrote a sketch about me doing a Carol Burnett, where, she used to ask questions of the audience. Remember that, John? So they wrote a sketch for me. And I was in the Bob Mackie gown, the red wig. I was in my glory. I thought, this is the closest I'm going to get to Carol, and I'm going to just love this. And then the next day, my phone rang. Carol got my home number through my agent, found out who my agents were, got my home telephone number, and I pick up the phone and I hear, "Hi, Louise. This is Carol Burnett. Listen, I saw you do an impression of me, and I just thought it was a hoot. And I'd love to meet you." Well, I couldn't believe it. Long story short, I meet Carol. It was one of the greatest days in my life. When I left her, I looked up to heaven and I said, "Oh God, if I could just meet Tim and Harvey now." And years later, I met Tim and Harvey, ended up being on the road with them, the three of us, doing those great sketches from the old Carol Burnett show for 15 years. And it started as that prayer of a little girl. And this is what I want people to know, John. God hears our prayers, and he loves when children pray. And if we can teach our children to pray and know that God is hearing us, this is going to be what's going to take them through the rest of their life. Because I look back now and realize it was that little girl's prayer. He moved heaven and earth. He moved me 3,000 miles to do what he answered that prayer to do. And it changed my life, literally.
Y'all have the book that you authored, When Couples Pray. And so my fiance, Rebecca, and I, we do our devotionals at nighttime together, and we pray together. And I told her, we're going to add something to that. We're going to get the book, When Couples Pray, and that's going to become part of our evening devotional that we do
That's
together.
great.
So you're
That is
an extra part of our home, above and beyond all the Godwinks and everything else. Now you're going to be part of our evening Bible study.
We love
Well,
it.
nothing thrills us more than that,
That's
John.
right.
We think of Godwinks as our mission for God, our job for God.
Yeah.
But our ministry for God is to encourage people to pray together, couples to pray together
Yes.
primarily.
Yes.
And because when you pray together 5 minutes a day for 40 days, which is what we ask people to do, it changes your life. I mean, your marriage is changed. If you've got young kids in the house, they are changed. Everybody around you is changed.
Yes.
Your job changes. Everything changes.
John, when we wrote that book, Couples Who Pray, another phone call out of the blue,
Yeah.
phone rings in our New York apartment, and it's Pauletta Washington, Denzel Washington's wife. And she said, "I heard about this book you're writing." She said, "I love this. I want to be a part of it." She says, "I want to write my story." Because when she was a little kid growing up, she would see her parents pray. And she knew when she got married that that's what she wanted for her spouse and for her family. So when she married Denzel, she made sure that they prayed together. And she said it kept our marriage together. It kept my family together. And so she wrote her story in our book, and she would go to churches and she would
do book signings.
She would do book signings. We've had lunch with her several times. It just touched her heart so much because she realized that power. There's one thing about a lot of us pray, we'll pray and we'll have grace and we'll pray sometimes when things we need answers. but it's the consistent prayers. When the husband and wife pray together consistently, that changes the whole dynamic of the marriage, because then you're inviting Jesus to come into your marriage, and it empowers every part of your life.
Can I tell you a story about that?
Sure.
Tim Keller, the famous pastor from New York City that many pastors looked up to, he died 2 or 3 years ago. But at 9/11, he said that his wife,
Kathy.
Kathy sat him down a week after the 9/11 experience in New York and said, Tim, I don't know as I can make it, because she suffered from Crohn's disease, which is, enhances depression. And in New York City during that time, we lived there then, there was kind of this lead blanket of depression over everybody. And so she was feeling a double dose of depression. She said, I don't think I can make it unless we pray together every single day. Now, he looked at her, being a pastor, pastors have got weddings to do, sudden funerals, people at the hospital, a sermon to write, and so on and so forth. And so, but he said, of course, honey. Now, she took that as patting her on the head a little bit. She said, Tim, let me ask you something. If you were told by your doctor tomorrow that you have a terminal illness, you are going to die in weeks, but if you take this little pill every single day, you will live a long life. Would you do it? Or would you say, oh gosh, I'm too busy? He got the message. And I talked to him 13 years after 9/11, and he said to me, we never missed a day of praying together. And it changed our life because we went through storms much more easily. We went through happy times much better. Everything changed for the better when two people pray together consistently.
Well, we're watching right now SQuire Rushnell Louise DuArt. You're on 15 on Fridays with Fletch. This is the end of segment 1. We'll come right back in just a moment with segment 2.